Real Virginia is proudly produced by the Virginia Farm Bureau Federation. Since 1926, Farm Bureau has been working to preserve Virginia farms and our rural heritage. Visit our website at vafarmbureau.org.
Home will always be Virginia, between the Blue Ridge and Chesapeake Bay, Atlantic to Appalachia, home in my heart always.
Hello everyone and welcome to Real Virginia, a show about Virginia agriculture and the people who produce all of the wonderful products we enjoy, brought to you by the Virginia Farm Bureau.
With the presidential election coming up in November, we examine the continued importance of the rural vote. Just in time for fall, Chef John Maxwell has a tasty treat featuring pumpkin. And how will Virginia farmers feed more than 9 billion hungry mouths in the future? High school students in Central Virginia discuss that very question at a unique farm-to-table symposium.
Welcome back, everyone. We're here at Wrenwood Farms in Charles City County, and this is their historical farm museum, and we're going to get a glimpse of it here in a minute. But history tells us that the farm vote is important, and in fact, it still is. And of course, this year we're talking about a presidential election, and the focus is all on voters in population centers. But as Dave Miller tells us, political experts say don't rule out the rural vote. It's very important.
With the presidential election set for November 8th of this year, voter turnout is expected to be high. Professor Dan Polazzolo says that candidates should not take rural voters for granted.
Well, I think historically the rural farm vote was critical in Virginia politics for many, many decades. Candidates need to pay attention to rural voters. They actually matter quite a bit. Our agriculture industry in Virginia is very, very important. No elected official should take the rural areas for granted, and we should all in Virginia be proud of the fact that we have such a strong and thriving agricultural and farming base.
With so many regulations coming out of Washington and the next farm bill right on the horizon, farmers and rural voters have a lot at stake in this election. Andrew Smith with the Virginia Farm Bureau Federation says many farmers are often fully engaged in the election process, knowing how important the results of an election can be to their livelihoods. Basically, they can be counted on to turn up at the polls.
We are coming up on a pretty big election, not only the presidential election, but for Congress. All of Virginia's House of Representative seats are up for election this year, but every vote counts. So often people look at Virginia, for example, and see the urbanization we've had at many spots around the state and that the rural vote is lessening. But every vote counts. We've seen that in a number of elections over the last several years, several cycles, where candidates have taken the rural vote for granted or written them off and just focused on the larger populated areas and end up losing by a small margin or not getting the votes where they needed it in the rural area to bring home a win.
With huge population bases in northern Virginia, Richmond, and Hampton Roads, Virginia has become an urban state in recent decades. But there are still plenty of other cultural areas outside major population areas. Polazzolo says rural voters are often passionate about political issues and can be a strong support base for politicians in every election.
Rural voters think beyond their basic economic needs, and they're not as inclined to want government to do things for them. Many of them are independent and believe in self-reliance on what we call cultural issues, everything from gun control to family values to religious observation of religion.
And rural voters know that not all political issues are strictly divided by party lines. Smith says it's a good idea for rural voters in particular to dig a little deeper when deciding who will get their vote.
I would just say that, folks, they need to look at the issues, whether they're agricultural, forest, rural, what's important to them, and make their decision on who they're going to vote for. Don't just look at a party on one way or the other. Don't listen to the rhetoric they may hear in the media. Go and look at the issues that are important to them and vote appropriately.
Smith says Virginia farmers need leaders that will listen to them and work with them on issues ranging from immigration reform to expanding overseas markets for farm products. While Virginia voters supported Republican candidates for president for 40 years, Democratic candidate Barack Obama won the state the last two presidential elections. Political pundits still consider Virginia to be a swing state, where either party could win. But one thing is for sure, voter turnout will be strong in the countryside this fall. In Richmond, Virginia, I'm Dave Miller.
Many of our nation's founding fathers, including George Washington and Thomas Jefferson, were also farmers. And for centuries, the nation's economic success was closely tied to the farm economy. That began to change with the Industrial Revolution, and in 1867 the first of several national farm political groups formed to improve the social and economic conditions for farmers. In 1919, the American Farm Bureau Federation was formed, and the Virginia Farm Bureau Federation was incorporated 90 years ago in 1926. Agriculture and forestry continue to be Virginia's largest economic sector.
I'm Mark Viette. Coming up on In the Garden, I'm going to talk about late season garden cleanup. Stay with us.
90 years ago, the Virginia Farm Bureau made our local farmers a promise to protect and preserve a way of life they'd worked so hard to establish. Today, our insurance agents work to protect all Virginians, not just farmers. Anyone can be a Farm Bureau member, but the original promise remains. There's a local Farm Bureau in every county of the state. We want to keep Virginia, Virginia. Visit our websites at farmbureauadvantage.com and vafarmbureau.org.
For many of us, it's time to close out our gardens for the winter, and that may mean you might need to prune some plants back first. Mark Viette shows us how in the garden.
There are a few plants that I really recommend that you cut back late in the season, especially plants that might be prone to diseases. And one of those plants is going to be your peonies. And you can see some of the peonies here are already dying back. There are other plants I may not recommend to cut back. Things that have seed pods like Rudbeckia or Yucca or other things that can feed the birds during the winter months. But peonies you should cut back. And I usually cut them back not with hedge trimmers, not with a weedy. I don't run over them with a mower. And the reason is if you do that and the leaves and the stems get ground up and put back on the soil, it can lead to more disease problems next spring. So I take a hand trimmers and you would just go through and completely remove each stem. And in this case, I throw this out. I really don't even use it in a compost pile. And cut them back just as low as you can. And you can pretty much do it when the leaves start to turn brown like this or late in the season. Late in the season, some plants like hosta really look ratty. The leaves are dying back. You can cut these back, and you can cut them back pretty hard. I just recommend that you come in with the trimmers and you cut them low. And then you can clean up, and you can put this on your compost pile, and you can cut all your hostas. You can even do this with daylilies. These are some seed pods of Rudbeckia, and if you look, there's tons of seed. So I would not cut something like this back because the birds will feed on it throughout the entire winter months. I'll leave one other note with you. There are certain plants I don't recommend cutting back late in the season. Sometimes evergreens you don't want to cut back because they'll come back up with new growth, and especially the spring blooming hydrangeas like right beside me. They have flower buds that have already been produced, so if you were to take this plant and shear it, you would cut off all the flowers that potentially could bloom for you next year. I'm Mark Viette. Join me next time in the garden.
For more garden tips, go to inthegardenradio.com.
Pumpkins are everywhere this time of year. Chef Maxwell has a recipe that not only features this symbol of fall, but also a historic bread. Coming up next in the heart of the home.
From our farms to your table. Virginia dairy farm families are dedicated to providing your family with nutritious, high-quality milk.
I'm Dan Myers, a fifth-generation dairy farmer from Virginia.
I'm Roy Vanderhyde, a first-generation dairy farmer from Virginia.
I'm Gerald Heatwolf, a third-generation dairy farmer from Virginia.
I am dedicated to dairy, my cows,
my milk,
and our land.
Pumpkins are raised commercially on 212 farms in Virginia. Most of them are sold at farmers markets, to supermarket chains and other stores as fall decorations, or directly to consumers as pick-your-own items. The number of pumpkin farms has declined even as the number of fall festivals and other tourist events have grown in rural Virginia. Most pumpkins sold for decorations are actually not very tasty. Instead, they've been bred to have firm shells and a long shelf life. Look for a smaller variety if you want to make pumpkin pie from scratch. This year's Virginia pumpkin harvest should be good if growers were able to irrigate their crop.
Pumpkin spice is everywhere in the fall. It's in your coffee, in your donuts, and of course desserts. But today, Chef John Maxwell has a recipe for pumpkin butter with homemade baked bread. Oh, to die for. And it will surely satisfy your taste buds and your belly in the heart of the home.
Hi, welcome to Heart of the Home here at Meadow Hall at Meadow Event Park in Doswell, Virginia. We've got some great recipes for you today. We're going to be doing Sally Lunn bread, very classic Virginia batter bread, and we're going to make some pumpkin butter that goes with it. The first thing we've got to do though is get this bread started because it's a yeast risen bread and it's going to take some time for it to rise. So I've got in here 4 cups of flour. I'm going to add a 1/4 cup of yeast. I'm going to add a cup of sugar. All right. And I'm going to mix that up. I normally would put this on that mixer, but that mixer is really, really loud. So I only want to do that when I absolutely have to. All right. So now I'm going to put this here underneath that mixer. All right. In here, in this pan, I've got 1 cup of milk, 1 cup of water, and a 1/4 pound of butter, 1 stick of butter. And I've got this turned on so it will melt and soften. All right. I don't necessarily want the butter to melt, but I do want it to soften. So it'll mix into that batter nice and easy. What I'm going to do is turn this machine on. I'm going to add the liquid, right, and let that roll, right, and until it's mixed up real well. Right? So here we go. All right, now I'm going to add a cup of flour. I'm going to add a cup of flour. There's 2 of these. And turn it on again. Okay, now most of that flour has gone into the mix, and I'm going to add these eggs 1 at a time. All right, while it's mixing. I want to make sure each egg is completely mixed in before I add the next one. So I know you can't smell it out there, but I can smell this warm milk and flour and yeast mix starting to develop. A little more flour. Depending on the size of the eggs, I always use a large egg, grade A large eggs. Depending on the size of the eggs, though, you may use a little more or a little less flour to get this batter. So I'm going to lift this up so you can see the texture that we're trying to find here. You see, it's definitely a batter. It's a thick batter, but it's a batter. It's kind of actually about halfway between a bread dough and a batter dough. So I'm going to take this, all right, and I'm going to cover it with plastic wrap and let it proof for about 40 minutes. All right, I've got this beautiful bundt pan that I've greased up with some whole butter, whole unsalted butter. I'm getting ready for this dough to go in it. Now, this dough, as you can see, is proofed nicely. It's risen. All right, and I'm going to take about half of it, all right, and I'm going to stretch it out and just wrap it around here. All right. Now, I want to try and smooth this end off here, right? Because wherever it wrinkles, it'll rise the same way. You'll see that fold line in there. So I want to smooth that out just a little bit. But this is all set, ready to go for its second rising. It has to rise again a second time. So put this away. Oh, look at this. It's just up nice. There it is, beautiful. And into the oven it goes at 350 degrees. While that's baking, we're going to make the pumpkin butter. So I got a little saucepan here, and I'm going to mix some pumpkin puree. And you can use canned pumpkin, or you can cook a pumpkin down and make your own puree. Either one works fine. If you're going to use canned, you might want to use a little more sugar because sometimes the salt content in canned products will compensate for sugar. So, but we're going to add a little bit of nutmeg, a little ground ginger, a little cinnamon, and some ground cloves. All right, we're going to mix that up a little bit. Just mix this around. And then we're going to take this and put it into this pot. Now, we didn't want to mix all the ingredients, the liquid ingredients in here, because this bowl is a little too small, and besides we want to warm it up some. I'm going to add some apple cider. Stir this around, and now I'm going to put it on the stove, and we're going to start getting this warm. While it's warming up, I'm going to add sugar, and I'm going to tell you, if you tell anybody how easy this pumpkin butter is, I'm going to deny it. All right, this is the salad straight out of the oven. So we're going to turn it out of this pan. Ooh, 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 doesn't that look pretty? And we're going to take a cut. It's almost cake-like, almost like pound cake in its texture. I got these slices over here. I'm going to put it down there so we can enjoy some pumpkin butter, some unsalted butter, and these are the... No, I'm not going to wait. I'm going to have mine right now. All right. Got a little bit of butter. And a little bit of pumpkin butter. And I'm ready. The rest of these people, they're on their own. Every week, we make recipes using great Virginia-grown food. We make them in our kitchen so you can make them in your kitchen. Join us next week on Heart of the Home when we get to play with more great Virginia food.
Recipes from the Heart of the Home can be found on Chef Maxwell's website, chefjohnmaxwell.com.
Farmers are always looking ahead to the next harvest, but as Norm Hyde tells us from a unique farm-to-table event, they are also looking at the next generation of farmers and the challenges that will face them.
Negative marketing campaigns, water shortages, food deserts, and economic barriers all were discussed by a panel of experts at a farm-to-table agriculture education dinner at Longwood University in September. Students from 21 high schools in Central Virginia attended, sponsored by their county farm bureaus. One hot-button question was how to improve the public opinion of genetically modified foods, which have been proven safe in hundreds of studies over the past 30 years. All the panelists agreed that biotechnology will be essential to solving the problem of how to feed an expected world population of 9.7 billion people in 2050. But different approaches will be needed.
We look at how we can increase the yields of our crops. As Lindsay said, crops today that can be more resistant to drought, more resistant to insects and molds and mildews and all of those things. We right now are producing corn that's well over 300 bushels an acre, which seemed unheard of just 10 years ago, and it's because of technology.
I also would be an advocate for big agriculture. I was blessed to be the 10th generation to be raised on my family's farm, and my husband and I have a large farm in Amelia, and it's going to take large agriculture production to meet these demands.
Will a rooftop garden ever feed the world? Not as it's currently construed, but could a large hydroponic facility feed a large quantity of people? You can grow a lot more lettuce in a 1-acre greenhouse than you can in a 1-acre crop field.
Students in the audience were able to ask written questions during the hour-and-a-half discussion that included addressing negative public opinions about modern farming and constant change.
When you go to buy a gallon of milk or a pint of milk in your high school, if it says antibiotic free, what do you all think? Do you all think the other milk has antibiotics in it? I see a lot of heads nodding, and that's a false marketing claim. All milk is antibiotic free.
A lot of producers in my county are non-GMO, organic, natural, all those things, and like we talked about, there is a market share for those people, and if you feel that is the market share you want to go after, Farm Bureau will support you in going after that market share. The most important thing, I think, is not attacking each other and tearing each other down.
The profile of the state is shifting along urban corridors, and what was really rural isn't so rural anymore, and what's urban has a growing interest in what's happening in rural. And so I think we need to just make sure we're all a part of that dialogue.
Some of the students in the audience were from local Virginia FFA chapters. In addition to learning more about the major issues facing farmers, they found encouragement for their possible future career.
The biggest challenge, I think, is the money issue. A lot of farmers, when they start out, they don't have the money or the resources to just jump into farming, and they can be a little bit intimidated about all the things that they have to do and all the things that they need. So it might scare them a little bit. They let us know that we have a support team behind us, that you're not going to be alone when you go into this industry, that a lot of people are here to help you with it.
There are all sorts of ways to get into agriculture. You don't have to come into it as a 1,000-acre row crop farmer. Like I said, there are friends of mine that started with hand tools and a walk-behind tiller.
With so many complicated questions to discuss, time quickly ran out for the panelists, but they promised to answer all of the student questions in writing. And one essay winner from each high school will be able to attend the nation's only vice presidential debate this election cycle, held at Longwood University on October 4th. In Farmville, Virginia, I'm Norm Hyde.
That's going to do it for this edition of Real Virginia. We are so glad you could join us to celebrate the bounty Virginia has to offer. Whether it's in your home, your garden, or your landscape, we are proud to say that this is Real Virginia. So for everyone from the Virginia Farm Bureau, thanks for watching. Make it a good week.
Home will always be Virginia, between the Blue Ridge and Chesapeake Bay.